the fall of 1982, 7 people in Chicago took a pill to ease a headache and never woke up. No warning, no connection, just a cold, sudden death inside a product trusted in every American home. The killer, never caught. What followed was a nationwide panic, a billion-dollar recall, and a manhunt for a phantom. But this wasn't just a poisoning. It was a message, a perfectly executed act of terror using something as ordinary as a bottle of Tylenol. Tonight, we peel back the seal and step into one of America's most chilling, unsolved mysteries. Chapter 1: The First Death. It was a quiet morning in the suburbs of Chicago. September 1982. The leaves had just begun to change. A chill in the air hinted at the season ahead. In a modest home in Elk Grove Village, a 12-year-old girl named Mary Kellerman woke up complaining of a sore throat and a mild fever. Her parents did what any caring parents would do. They gave her a capsule of Tylenol. Extra strength. A trusted over-the-counter remedy, something they'd used dozens of times before. 4 hours later, Mary collapsed in the bathroom. Her eyes were wide open, pupils fixed, her body unresponsive. She was pronounced dead shortly after arriving at the hospital. Doctors had no answers, no signs of trauma, no history of illness. Nothing made sense. Just hours later, across the city in Arlington Heights, a 27-year-old postal worker named Adam Janus left work early. He wasn't feeling well, just a headache. At home, he took 2 Tylenol capsules and laid down to rest. Within minutes, he was in severe distress. He died shortly after, with no warning, no apparent cause. His family rushed to the hospital in shock. His wife and younger brother gathered to mourn, distraught and confused. When they returned home that same evening, the grief was unbearable. Adam's brother, Stanley, reached for the same bottle of Tylenol to ease a headache of his own. His wife, Teresa, took one too. Both collapsed within minutes. Both died before sunrise. 3 people, 1 family, dead in a day. Elsewhere, more stories were unfolding. Paula Prince, a United Airlines flight attendant, returned to her apartment downtown after a long day and took a Tylenol capsule before bed. Her body was found days later, slumped in the bathroom, with the open Tylenol bottle still sitting on her counter. Mary Reiner, a mother of 4, had just returned home after giving birth to her 4th child. She took a Tylenol to ease some postpartum pain. She never got to hold her newborn again. Mary McFarland, 31, collapsed at work shortly after taking a capsule from a bottle she kept in her purse. 7 people, different ages, different lives, no connection. One link, Tylenol. At first, no one noticed the pattern. Hospitals thought they were seeing isolated tragedies, cardiac arrest, allergic reactions, aneurysms. But the rapid cluster of deaths, all eerily similar, all happening within a short window in the same geographic area, couldn't be coincidence. It was a pharmacist who finally raised the alarm. A sharp-eyed investigator at one of the hospitals noticed that multiple victims had recently ingested Tylenol. Suspicion turned into horror when testing revealed that some capsules had been laced with potassium, cyanide, a lethal dose, enough to kill within minutes. The revelation sent shockwaves through Chicago. Cyanide, a deadly poison, one so toxic that even a grain the size of a few salt crystals could kill. And it wasn't being administered by injection or in food, but hidden inside medicine. Medicine people trusted, Stores were ordered to pull Tylenol from their shelves. Police went door to door warning residents. Johnson & Johnson, the maker of Tylenol, scrambled to respond. They issued public recalls and set up emergency hotlines. They didn't yet know how the capsules had been poisoned, but they knew the consequences. People stopped taking pills altogether. Pharmacies pulled not just Tylenol, but anything in capsule form. Panic set in. The idea that someone had tampered with consumer medication, not in the factory, but out in the wild, was terrifying. Investigators concluded that the poisonings were not the result of a manufacturing error. No, this was deliberate. Someone had purchased bottles of Tylenol from stores, opened them, inserted cyanide-laced capsules, resealed the bottles, and placed them back on the shelves for unsuspecting victims to buy. The randomness was part of the horror. Anyone could be next. And still, there were no suspects, no fingerprints, no surveillance footage, no DNA, just 7 bodies, 7 bottles, and a chilling method that seemed to come out of nowhere. The media dubbed it the Tylenol Murders. The term sent shivers down the spine of every American. It wasn't just the deaths, it was the betrayal. A product found in virtually every home, now weaponized. And the killer had struck with such precision, such cold calculation, that the public feared more was coming. Investigators worked around the clock. They tracked bottle lot numbers, mapped out store locations, interviewed employees, reviewed security protocols, traced purchase records. But there was no smoking gun, no witnesses, just chaos and grief. What haunted the city most wasn't just the loss, it was the silence afterward. The killer didn't send a manifesto, didn't claim responsibility, didn't ask for ransom. It was as if the deaths had been engineered for one purpose only: fear. And it worked. People refused to take any medication in capsule form. Parents feared giving their children so much as a vitamin. Newscasters advised boiling medicine or switching to tablets. The pharmaceutical industry went into crisis mode. Behind closed doors, the FBI and local police began considering possibilities, darker than they'd dared imagine. Was this an act of terrorism, corporate sabotage, a lone madman, or worse, was this just a test? The deeper they looked, the more unsettling it became. There was no pattern to the victims, no clear motive, no demands, just death, fast and silent. The product tampering seemed random, but it was done with such care, such anonymity, that it had to be methodical. Whoever was behind it had access to cyanide, knew how to handle it without leaving traces, and had the nerve to walk into stores and put the tainted bottles back without raising suspicion. Days passed, then weeks. The number of deaths remained at 7, but the fear lingered. Chicago was frozen in paranoia. The public waited for another wave, but it never came. And so, the investigation widened. Agents began receiving letters, strange letters. One, in particular, stood out. It was sent to Johnson & Johnson. It claimed responsibility for the poisonings and demanded $1 million to stop them. It was signed by a man named James W. Lewis. The name would become infamous, but for now, in those early days of the investigation, all that existed was 7 dead and 1 million questions. The Tylenol bottles were sealed, the poison nearly undetectable until it was too late, and the suspect, if there even was one, was nowhere in sight. This wasn't just a murder case, it was a message, and the country, for the first time, was listening. Because if something as ordinary, as trusted as Tylenol could be turned into a weapon, then what else could? The first death had seemed like a tragedy, the second a coincidence. But by the time the seventh came, the nation understood the truth. This was no accident. This was calculated, and whoever was behind it was still out there, watching, waiting, maybe even smiling. Chapter 2: The Pill That Shattered Trust. As word spread of the mysterious deaths in Chicago, panic didn't just ripple, it exploded. Within hours of the announcement that Tylenol capsules had been laced with cyanide, the city turned upside down. Pharmacies became the epicenter of a new kind of hysteria. But people weren't storming in to buy medicine, they were bringing it back, flooding drugstore counters with half-used bottles, unopened boxes, blister packs still sealed in plastic. Parents clutched bags of pills like contaminated waste, demanding answers no one could give. Police cars patrolled neighborhoods, bullhorns blaring urgent warnings. Do not take Tylenol. If you have it, throw it away. Grocery stores taped off medicine aisles, shelves that once held the most trusted name in pain. Relief was stripped bare not from demand, but fear. In homes across the city, people opened their medicine cabinets with suspicion. What else could be poisoned? Was it just Tylenol? Could it be Advil next? Cough syrup? Vitamins? The government didn't have answers. No one did. And in that vacuum, fear metastasized. The FDA issued a nationwide alert, advising all consumers to avoid Tylenol capsules until further notice. Hospitals opened emergency hotlines. Pharmacies set up drop-off bins. School nurses confiscated medications from students. And in the middle of it all stood one of the most respected corporations in America. Johnson & Johnson now thrust into the heart of a national crisis. Within 48 hours, the company made an unprecedented decision: a full recall of every bottle of Tylenol, extra-strength capsules on the market. That meant pulling 31 million bottles off shelves, a move that cost over $100 million, nearly $500 million today. But this wasn't about money anymore. It was about survival. Johnson & Johnson executives scrambled to respond, holding emergency press conferences, working hand in hand with the FBI and local law enforcement. Their CEO, James Burke, went on national television and urged the public, do not consume any Tylenol capsules until the source of this tragedy has been identified. Their brand was on the brink of collapse, not because of what they had done, but because of what someone else had done to them. Still, public trust doesn't wait for investigations. And in Chicago, trust had evaporated. News anchors spoke in grim, measured tones, updating death counts, analyzing chemical diagrams of cyanide molecules, replaying chilling police audio from 911 calls. Viewers watched in horror as lab technicians in suits handled bottles of Tylenol like nuclear waste. The image that circulated the most, a gloved hand holding an open capsule. White powder spilling out like sugar became a symbol of broken safety. Late-night talk shows dropped the jokes. Morning news programs ran segments on how to safely dispose of your pills. The terror wasn't just in what had happened, it was in how easily it could happen again. Cyanide was colorless, odorless, tasteless in small amounts. You couldn't detect it by smell. You couldn't see it. And yet, within minutes, it stopped the heart. The idea that it had slipped through a product trusted by millions was almost too much to comprehend. In schools, teachers fielded frightened questions from children. Will my mum die if she takes her medicine? In hospitals, ERS braced for new victims, triaging anyone who had taken Tylenol in the past few hours. In homes, people flushed bottles down toilets, poured pills into the trash, duct-taped medicine cabinets shut. The psychological shock was total. This wasn't just a crime, it was a rupture in the social fabric. And the media, sensing the magnitude, gave it wall-to-wall coverage. Night after night, the same haunting faces of the victims appeared on screen. The Janus family, 3 members gone in a single day. Paula Prince, her last known photo caught on a convenience store security camera, holding the bottle that would kill her. Mary Reiner, who had just brought home her newborn child. These weren't just deaths, they were stories. Tragedies woven into the living rooms of every American household. And behind each one was the same silent killer, a capsule the size of a fingertip. Tylenol, once synonymous with safety, was now the face of death. But this wasn't just a blow to one brand. It was a blow to an entire system. Consumers began to question everything. How safe were over-the-counter medications, really? How easy would it be to tamper with food, cosmetics, baby formula? And what did it say about the world they lived in? If someone could walk into a store, slip poison into a bottle, and vanish. The pharmaceutical industry had no answers. Retailers rushed to install tamper-proof packaging. Bottles were suddenly wrapped in plastic seals. Safety tabs appeared under caps. The phrase tamper-evident became a marketing mandate. But all of that came too late for the 7 victims and too late for the people who had to live in the aftermath. In the weeks that followed, Johnson & Johnson launched the largest product recall in US history. They offered free replacements, set up consumer hotlines, and even allowed people to exchange capsules for tablets. They partnered with law enforcement, funded investigations, and pledged transparency. And remarkably, the public began to forgive. Not because they had to, but because the company took responsibility in a moment when many would have deflected blame. Still, the scars ran deep. For months, people second-guessed every pill they took. A simple headache became a test of courage. Parents hovered over children, watching them swallow. Strangers eyed each other warily in the pain relief aisle. The Tylenol murders weren't just about death, they were about doubt. They shattered a belief that the systems around us would always protect us. They proved that even the most ordinary, object a bottle of pills could be turned into a weapon, and they exposed a chilling truth. We were never as safe as we thought. Chicago, once a city defined by grit and steel, now felt fragile. The invisible threat had struck at its core, and the question lingered. If the killer had done this once, what was stopping them from doing it again? The manhunt intensified. The FBI received thousands of tips. Every crank letter, every threatening call, every suspicious shopper became a possible lead. Yet despite the panic, the poisonings didn't continue. No new deaths, no new bottles, just silence. And that silence was its own kind of terror, because it meant the killer had gotten away with it. Chapter 3. The Ghost in the Aisle. No fingerprints, no DNA, no surveillance footage, no eyewitnesses. But whoever had done this hadn't left nothing. They'd left something far worse, a pattern. As the investigation unfolded, a terrifying realization emerged. The Tylenol capsules hadn't been poisoned at the factory. This wasn't a breach of manufacturing. This was something much more intimate. Someone had walked into stores, purchased Tylenol off the shelf, taken it home, emptied some of the capsules, filled them with cyanide, then returned the tampered bottles, right back to the same shelves. They were poisoning random strangers, one bottle at a time. The killer didn't need a lab or a team. All they needed was a small vial of potassium cyanide, steady hands, and time. This meant something chilling. The deaths weren't tied to one shipment or batch. They were tied to geography. All of the poisoned bottles had been bought in or around Chicago. That was the killer's hunting ground, and because of that, no one knew how many more bottles might still be out there. The FBI, now leading the case, launched one of the largest manhunts in modern history. They poured through pharmacy receipts, analyzed store logs, interviewed cashiers, scanned surveillance tapes, but in 1982, surveillance wasn't what it is today. Most stores had no cameras. Those that did had grainy black and white footage that was recorded over daily. There was no facial recognition, no credit card databases. Most people paid in cash. The trail was cold before it even began. But one thing was clear. This wasn't random. It was surgical. The killer had targeted busy stores in populated areas. They knew the bottles would be picked up quickly. They knew people wouldn't suspect anything until it was too late. There was something almost theatrical about it. This wasn't just murder. It was a performance. And then, 10 days after the first death, a letter arrived at Johnson & Johnson headquarters. It was postmarked from Chicago. No return address. The handwriting was blocky, almost mechanical. The message was simple, chilling, and unmistakable. Gentlemen, as you can see, it is easy to place cyanide into capsules sitting on store shelves. And since your company is so unwilling to cooperate with me, I've decided to kill at random. The writer demanded $1 million wired to a specific bank account. He signed the letter, James W. Lewis. For the first time, the case had a name. But was it the right one? The FBI tracked the bank account. It had been opened under the name of a Chicago man whose identity had been stolen. It was a dead end, except for the envelope. There was a faint fingerprint on the adhesive flap. It didn't match anyone in law enforcement databases, but the FBI was now hunting someone who, at the very least, wanted credit for the killings. Soon they found him, James W. Lewis, a former accountant, a man with a history of fraud and a long trail of aliases. He was arrested in New York City after a nationwide manhunt. He didn't deny sending the letter, but he insisted he hadn't poisoned anyone. He said he was just exploiting the panic to make a quick buck. A grifter, not a killer. But was that true? Investigators were split. Lewis had the knowledge. He had the ego. He had the opportunity. But he had no direct ties to any of the poisoned bottles. No cyanide was found in his home. No materials. No evidence. Nothing but the letter. And in a case this thin, that wasn't enough. He was eventually convicted, not for murder, but for extortion. He served 13 years in prison. When he got out, he returned to obscurity. Never charged with the killings. Never confessed. And never forgotten. To this day, many believe Lewis was the Tylenol killer. Others think he was a copycat, a parasite feeding on someone else's horror. But here's what makes it worse. If he wasn't the killer, then the real murderer was still out there, never caught. Still a ghost. The FBI pursued hundreds of leads. Psychiatrists helped profile the suspect. He was likely a white male, intelligent, methodical, with a deep need for control and recognition. Possibly a failed professional, someone with resentment toward institutions, corporations, or society at large. He didn't kill out of impulse. He killed to send a message. But what was the message? Some believed it was anti-capitalist terrorism, a strike against Big Pharma. Others believed it was personal revenge. Still others thought it was a random act by a thrill-seeker, a person who wanted to feel powerful by watching the world panic. Whoever it was, they knew exactly what they were doing. Cyanide doesn't just kill, it terrifies. It suffocates your cells, preventing oxygen from reaching your tissues. Victims collapse within minutes. Eyes bulge. Skin turns cherry red. The killer chose a method that was as symbolic as it was lethal, silent, fast, untraceable. And they got away with it. Despite the largest criminal investigation in Illinois history, no one has ever been formally charged with the Tylenol murders. No one has ever confessed. No physical evidence has ever conclusively tied anyone to the crime. The case remains open to this day. The Tylenol murders changed everything. They led to the invention of tamper-evident packaging. They transformed how medications are sealed and labeled. They introduced safety protocols that would eventually be used around the world. But even as laws changed, the fear lingered. The idea that one person, just one, could walk into a store, blend in with a crowd, poison a few bottles, and vanish without a trace. It was the perfect crime. No motive, no weapon, no witnesses, just a body count. 7 lives stolen in moments. Dozens more traumatized, millions afraid, and one shadow moving through the aisles, watching it all unfold. Whoever the Tylenol killer was, he didn't just evade capture. He rewrote the rules of public safety. And in doing so, he became more than a killer. He became a myth, a warning, a whisper in every store aisle. A question that still haunts investigators, families, and anyone who's ever bought a bottle of medicine. Was it him? Is he still out there? And could he do it again? Chapter 4. James Lewis, the man everyone suspected, but no one could prove. James William Lewis was not an ordinary man. He was the kind of person who wore many faces and left trails instead of footprints. Before his name was ever linked to Tylenol, Lewis had already built a resume of deception. He had impersonated doctors. He had committed financial fraud. He had bounced from state to state with aliases, scams, and schemes that made him a suspect in dozens of unrelated crimes. He was smart, too smart for his own good. And when the Tylenol panic swept across America, James Lewis saw opportunity. He didn't touch the poison, at least not that anyone could prove. What he did was send a letter, cold, calculated, and signed with his own name. He demanded $1 million from Johnson & Johnson, claiming he was the one who had tampered with the Tylenol capsules. He even told them exactly how it had been done. But when the FBI caught him, he said the whole thing had been a hoax. He had read about the deaths in the news. He figured he could exploit the chaos for a quick payday. It was extortion, sure, but not murder. And that was the wall the investigation slammed into. Because as much as law enforcement wanted him to be the killer, there was no physical evidence tying James Lewis to the poisoned bottles. No cyanide in his home. No trace chemicals. No witnesses. No surveillance footage. Not even a receipt. Just a letter, and a smug man who knew exactly how to stay one step ahead. They charged him with attempted extortion. He was sentenced to 13 years in prison, but not for the murders. Not for the 7 people who had died in agony. For the letter. That was all they had. When he was released, Lewis didn't slink into the shadows. He gave interviews. He appeared on TV. He seemed to relish the notoriety, always careful, always calculated, never confessing. In one interview, when asked directly if he was the killer, he smirked and said, "Prove it." And no one ever could. But if it wasn't him, then who? Some investigators believed the real killer may have been a disgruntled employee at Johnson & Johnson or one of their suppliers. Someone with access to the product before it hit the shelves. But that theory had holes. The tampered bottles came from different batches, different factories. The common point wasn't the origin. It was the destination Chicago. Others believed it was an act of revenge. Maybe someone who had lost a loved one, due to medical negligence or corporate greed. Poisoning Tylenol was a way to punish the system and make a statement. But if that was the motive, why not claim it? Why not leave a manifesto, like so many other ideological killers? Then there were the darker theories, that the Tylenol killer wasn't done, that this was the work of a budding serial killer who wanted to experiment, perfect his methods, disappear into anonymity. Some even speculated that the killer went on to commit other crimes unrelated, unlinked, unnoticed. But none of those theories had evidence, just questions. James Lewis remained at the center of the storm. The FBI kept him on their radar for decades. They searched his computers. They interviewed his acquaintances. They tracked his movements. In 2010, they raided his home again, hoping that new forensic techniques might finally connect him to the 1982 killings. They found nothing. He died in 2023 at age 76, still a free man, still unconvicted, still unproven, and in death he took the answers with him. What made James Lewis such a haunting figure wasn't just what he did, it was what he didn't do. He didn't run, he didn't hide, he didn't confess. He lived with the suspicion of an entire nation on his shoulders and never once buckled under its weight. And in that space between guilt and innocence, he became something more than a suspect. He became a symbol of the justice system's limits, a ghost in plain sight. For the families of the victims, it was unbearable. They had buried their children, their parents, their siblings without ever getting justice. Every year, they watched new documentaries, read new articles, hoped for new leads, but they always ended the same way, with a shrug, a maybe. A man everyone suspected but no one could prove. That's what makes this story linger. Not just the horror of the crime, but the silence that followed, the lack of closure, the uncomfortable truth that sometimes evil wins not by overwhelming force but by precision, patience, and the absence of evidence. James Lewis knew that. Whether or not he poisoned those capsules, he understood how the system worked. He understood that without fingerprints, without video, without witnesses, suspicion means nothing. And so he walked free. For 40 years, the Tylenol murders reshaped American consumer safety, but they also left a scar, a deep, unhealed wound in the psyche of a nation. Because it wasn't just about 7 deaths. It was about the fear that it could happen again, that somewhere, someone could repeat the exact same steps, and no one would see it coming. And if James Lewis wasn't the one who did it, then the killer is still out there, still breathing, still remembering, still watching every time a hand reaches for a bottle on a shelf. And maybe, just maybe, still smiling. Chapter 5: The Legacy of an Unseen Crime. Before 1982, people took medicine without thinking. They trusted the bottle on the shelf. They trusted the brand. They trusted the system. That trust died with 7 people in Chicago. And what followed was a transformation not just in packaging or policy, but in the way Americans saw the world around them. The Tylenol murders didn't just kill individuals. They killed blind faith. In the months after the tragedy, the United States launched a total overhaul of pharmaceutical safety. It wasn't just about fixing a mistake, it was about rebuilding trust. Tamper-evident packaging became mandatory. The phrase itself, entered the national vocabulary, like a scar across a once innocent landscape. Bottles were now sealed with foil. Boxes came with glue and plastic bands. Pills were packed tight in blister packs. Every layer became a promise. If this is broken, don't trust it. It was a new kind of security, but also a new kind of fear. Because the truth was, until someone dies, you don't know your medicine has been tampered with. Johnson & Johnson, the company behind Tylenol, was on the verge of collapse. Their flagship product had become a weapon. Stock prices plummeted. Public opinion soured. And yet through decisive action, transparency, and innovation, they did something no one expected. They recovered fast. They recalled 31 million bottles. They cooperated with law enforcement. They redesigned their packaging before the government even made it law. And most importantly, they put public safety above profit. That decision saved them. Some even called it the gold standard of crisis response. But no amount of PR could erase what had happened. Because for every family that grieved, for every household that threw away their medicine, for every mother who hesitated before giving her child a pill, this wasn't just a crime. It was a breach of reality. It proved that horror could hide in plain sight, that trust could be weaponized, that something as small as a capsule could become an execution device. And in that realization came a wave of paranoia that never fully went away. People began inspecting everything: milk cartons, canned food, water bottles. If a seal looked crooked, if a wrapper seemed loose, it wasn't just a manufacturing defect, it was a threat. The Tylenol case changed how America thought about safety. But it also raised a darker question. How many other poisonings have gone unnoticed? Because the terrifying truth is, unless someone connects the dots, random deaths can pass as coincidence. A stroke, a seizure, an allergic reaction. Not every victim is found with a bottle next to their body. Not every coroner tests for cyanide. And so the Tylenol killer, whoever they were, showed us the limits of detection, the limits of science, the limits of truth. Even now, decades later, experts admit this might not be the only case, just the one we noticed. That thought lingers like a bitter taste, because it means the system only works when someone notices the pattern, when someone sees the connection, when someone gets lucky. And that's not justice. That's roulette. Over the years, other tampering cases have emerged. Copycats. Some were caught. Most weren't. None matched the scale or impact of the Tylenol murders. But each one was a reminder. The seal can break again. The killer can return. The invisible threat is still out there. What makes the legacy of this crime so haunting is not just the loss. It's the uncertainty. We don't know who did it. We don't know why. We only know that they changed the world with 7 silent strikes. No manifesto, no motive, no closure. Just a warning, written in pain and fear, that safety is never guaranteed. And maybe that's the most chilling part of all. Because in the end, the Tylenol case wasn't just about medicine. It was about vulnerability. It was about how something ordinary can be turned against us. How systems built on trust can be undone by a single bad actor. And how that actor, if smart enough, might never be caught. Every time you twist open a cap and hear the crack of a seal, you're hearing the echo of 1982. Every foil you peel back is a relic of that week in Chicago. Every security feature is a tombstone to a victim whose name you might not know, but whose death rewrote the rules. This is the legacy: vigilance, suspicion, and a cold, hard truth that no one wants to admit, that safety isn't a guarantee. It's an illusion we work to maintain, and sometimes it takes a tragedy to remind us just how fragile that illusion really is. Chapter 6: Whisper in the Dark. To this day, no one knows who did it. No trial, no confession, no smoking gun. Just a trail of empty bottles, grieving families, and a fear that refuses to die. James Lewis, the man who taunted the world with a typed letter, who demanded $1 million to stop the killing, died in 2023. He went to his grave maintaining innocence, or perhaps guarding the perfect lie. Investigators chased him for decades. They had suspicions, theories, even a motive, but no hard evidence. No cyanide on his hands. No camera catching him at the shelf. Just a name, a shadow, and then nothing. With Lewis gone, the last thread unraveled. The case unofficially closed. But the questions, they still whisper. Because if someone could walk into a store, tamper with bottles, vanish without a trace, and change the way an entire country sees medicine, who else could do the same? The terrifying answer is simple: anyone. The killer could have been a neighbor, a co-worker, a stranger in a trench coat, or someone you'd never suspect. They didn't need access to a factory. They didn't need science. They just needed time, patience, and silence. And maybe that's the legacy. Not the fear, but the possibility. The idea that true horror doesn't scream. It doesn't wear a mask. It moves quietly, with a steady hand, and leaves no fingerprints. It only needs one act, to echo forever. Now, as you sit here, thinking about what's in your cabinet, ask yourself, would you know if someone had touched it? Would anyone? And if you found out, would it already be too late? These aren't just stories. These are echoes from a moment that never truly ended. If this story made you pause, if it left you with questions, with chills, or with something you can't quite shake, then you're exactly where you need to be. This is Echoes from Tomorrow, where we bring the past back one haunting truth at a time. Subscribe for more stories that aren't supposed to be remembered. Comment your theory. Who do you think poisoned the pills? Turn on notifications, because some echoes only reach those who are still listening. The whisper isn't over. It never was.